This may sound odd, but I didn't know that I was Asian until I was 18. Until then, I only knew myself as Japanese and Korean, because growing up in Hawaii, where most of the locals are of Asian ancestry, saying you're Asian isn't saying all that much. And so at 18, I went to college on the mainland, Philadelphia, where the majority of the students and the locals were not of Asian ancestry, where the majority did not see me as Japanese and Korean, but as Asian. The same as or very similar to Chinese, Filipino, Thai, Vietnamese, Indonesian. The few who bothered to ask, "Where are you from?" seemed eager for a response only in order to categorize what little they knew about the Japanese and the Korean with what little they knew about me. Today I can name what I felt back then: resentment that I was being grouped with others so different from me, hurt that I wasn't being seen as who I was, anger that this new identity as Asian was being imposed upon me, frustration that I didn't seem to have a choice about it. Today I realize I did have a choice, and that I actually made a choice. I taught myself what it means to be Asian. I studied the lives of those who came before me, of ancestors, which I later found out is a very Asian approach to learning. I read the stories of Asians in the United States who wrestled with questions of their identity. Here are some of their stories in their own voices. "1852. The California gold rush has rapidly transformed the settlement of San Francisco into an ethnically diverse boomtown. More than 22,000 immigrants have recently arrived from China. Governor John Bigler, in an attempt to exploit anti-Chinese sentiment for his own political gain, has proposed restrictions on immigration from China. Norman Ah Sing, a prominent merchant and a naturalized US citizen, writes a letter of protest to the governor. Sir, you are deeply convinced, you say, quote, that to enhance the prosperity and preserve the tranquility of the state, Asiatic immigration must be checked, end quote. This, Your Excellency, is but one step toward a retrograde movement of the government, which the citizens of this country ought to never tolerate. Immigration made you what you are, your nation what it is. It transferred you at once from childhood to manhood and made you great and respectable throughout the nations of the earth. I am sure Your Excellency cannot, if you would, prevent your being called the descendant of an immigrant, for I am sure you do not boast of being a descendant of the red man. But your further logic is more reprehensible. You argue that this is a republic of a particular race, that the Constitution of the United States admits of no asylum to any other than the pale face. This proposition is false in the extreme, and you know it. The declaration of your independence and all the acts of your government, your people, and your history are all against you. "1942. President Roosevelt has signed Executive Order 9066, clearing the way for the mass relocation and internment of over 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. Mary Tsukamoto, 28 years old, opens a local office of the Japanese American Citizens League to help her community prepare for the pending evacuations. I remember Mrs. Kimura, whose son was 32 years old and retarded. She took care of this boy at home. The welfare office said, no, she couldn't take him, that the families have to institutionalize a child like that. It was a very tragic thing for me to have to tell her. And I remember going out into the field. She was hoeing strawberries, and I told her what they told us, that you can't take your son with you. And so she cried, and I cried with her. A few days before they were evacuated, they came to take him away to an institution. And it was only about a month after we got to Fresno Center that they sent us a wire saying he died. All these years she loved him and took care of him. He only knew Japanese and ate Japanese food. I was thinking of the family. They got over it quietly. They endured it. I just felt guilty, just for having been involved. I was busy almost to the last day at the JACL office, sending the weekly bulletins and handling the personal problems of everybody. And I wrote to the President of the United States and the principal of the high school and the newspaper editors, thanking them for whatever they did for us. I don't know if it was crazy to do this, but I felt that history was happening, and I felt it was important to say goodbye in a proper way, speaking for the people who were leaving and trying to tell our friends that we were loyal Americans and that we were sorry that this was happening. We needed to say something, and that's what I did. "1965, Filipino farm workers in Delano, California have walked off local grape farms, demanding wages equal to the federal minimum wage. Filipino American labor organizers invite Mexican Americans to join the grape strike. And 1 week later, Mexican American workers led by Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta joined the Filipino movement. Larry Itlion, a Filipino American labor leader, organized the initial strike. I have the ability to make that white man know I am just as mean as anybody in this world. I could make him think, and I could make them recognize that I'm mean in terms of my direction, fighting for the rights of Filipinos in this country. Because I feel we are just as good as any of them. I feel we have the same rights as any of them, because in that Constitution, it said that everybody has equal rights and justice. You've got to make that come about. They are not going to give it to you. "1982, Vincent Chin is assaulted by two auto workers disgruntled by the recent layoffs in Detroit, which have been attributed to the success of Japanese automakers. Chin, who is Chinese American, dies. And the two assailants, who face state criminal charges and federal civil rights charges, serve no jail time and are fined $3,000 for their actions. Helen Zia, a journalist, helps bring Vincent Chin's story to national attention. It's hard even to imagine, I think, for people today, what it was like then. The ethnic populations, whether Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Indian, Vietnamese, they were really so tiny. So the idea of people coming together to stand up, to build a movement together, to say that we stand against racism and against violence and hate crimes against Asian Americans had never been done before. The Vincent Chin case really is a milestone, not just for Asian Americans, but really in all of American history, and in civil rights history in particular. And the question of Vincent Chin's citizenship was one of the first things that the federal prosecutors looked at when they were trying to decide whether this was a case that the federal government should be bothered with. That was within the purview, the federal protection, that an immigrant would be protected. This opened up the whole civil rights definition, the arena, the way we look at civil rights, and really the way we look at the humanity and human rights of all people in America, not just Americans, but all people in America. We can, as Asian Americans, be very proud that this piece of Asian American history is a critical piece of American history that every American should be proud of and every American should know about. (1992). Los Angeles erupts in violence after the not guilty verdict of 4 police officers accused of assaulting Rodney King. Korean American businesses are particular targets of looting and destruction. Reverend Tom Choi is a Korean American minister in Los Angeles. I remember some people complaining that Korean Americans didn't patronize black businesses. So I made sure that I went to black businesses for lunch and whatnot, wearing my collar and waiting around for food. And I remember just going to people and people just looking at me. And I just went to somebody who was standing next in line, and I said, "How are you doing?" Every place I went, I got the same answer. "Oh, I'm doing all right. How are you?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just trying to make it." And there'd be a chuckle and agreement. Then we just started having this conversation. And in every instance, of these people that, quote unquote, were supposed to be hostile on TV and whatnot, there was nothing but warmth, nothing but a sense of yeah, we should stick together, and nothing but friendliness that I have felt. And this was a discovery that I had been out of touch with this part of the city. (2001). After September 11, the United States witnesses a surge in prejudice and hate crimes against Muslims and people who are mistaken as Muslim. Shamoon Patel is a diversity educator at a university in California. When 9/11 happened and the Japanese American community was literally the first to come out and say, "This cannot happen again. We do not want our South Asian American brothers and sisters and our Arab American brothers and sisters put in detention camps and strip searched and taken away from their homes and have their rights erased as Americans." That was probably one of the most beautiful moments of my young adult life. To see another community to come out with such vigor and forcefulness on behalf of another community because they had lived that experience. You can't ask for better allies or better support. And that's the direction our community needs to continue to move in, to say, "I've lived this, you shouldn't have to live this." In our scripture reading today, Jesus speaks to a large crowd on a mountain, and we imagine ourselves in that crowd, a gathering of people of all ages, all shapes and sizes, all colors of skin and hair and eyes. And yet, in spite of all our diversity, Jesus speaks to us as one people. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." We sense a rhythm in his words, and that rhythm leads us to meaning. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed. The people are blessed. We are blessed. You are blessed. You are beloved. God loves you continually. God is continually offering you a blessing. You are blessed. Are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. God sees you in your hunger. God sees you in your thirst. God sees you in your poverty, in your mourning, in your persecution. God knows our resentment, our hurt, our anger, our frustration. And knowing this, God meets us with a blessing. For they will be filled. And that blessing is a blessing of hope, God's blessing of a vision for the future, the kingdom of heaven, the reign of God, where we will be comforted, where we will be filled, where we will receive mercy and be called children of God. God is blessing us, even in our trials, and God is leading us into a future of hope. Jesus' words transform our view from despair to hope, from hurt into healing, from anger into action, from isolation into connection. I had thought my identity as Asian was a curse, but I began to see it as a blessing. As I learned what it means to be Asian, I began to see similarities I share with Chinese, Singaporean, Malaysian, Indian. I began to see connections I share with Norman Ah Sing in our passion to challenge racism, with Mary Tsukamoto in our compassion for the suffering, with Larry Itliong in our anger against oppression, with Helen Zia in our desire for justice. I am not Chinese or Filipino. My Japanese-American family was not interned during World War II. But these people are my ancestors, and I stand with them today. As I learned what it means to be Asian, I began to see my identity as more inclusive, more encompassing, more expansive, wider, broader. I began to free myself from the narrowness of only knowing myself as Japanese and Korean. And I began to know myself as Japanese and Korean, and Asian, and American, and a member of the human race. And I came closer to knowing myself as God knows me, a blessed, beloved, justice-seeking, peacemaking child of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. As we begin this new year together as one people, I pray, may it be so. May it be so. May it be so.